He walked into the store thinking it would be a normal morning. But the moment he reached the counter, the world shifted. Eyes avoided him. Hands hesitated. A polite smile masked a deeper judgment. "We can't serve you right now," the clerk said, as if the words weren't heavy enough to crush him. He blinked, confused. Denied. Not for paperwork, not for policy, just for who he was. The whispers of other customers barely reached him over the roar of disbelief in his mind. And then he realized this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The question burned inside him. How many times has the world decided people like him are invisible? And how many more would it take before someone stood up and said, "Enough"? Hit like and subscribe to follow this story. Let's dive in. Confusion and disbelief washed over him. Denied? Not for lack of documents, not for policy, not for any reason that should have mattered. Just because he was blind. Just because of who he was. A hush fell over the lobby as other customers turned toward him. Some whispered in surprise. Others stared silently. The energy shifted from ordinary bustle to something heavier, more oppressive. And in that moment, he felt the full weight of society's indifference and prejudice, the small accumulating. Indignities he had brushed aside all his life converged into a singular, undeniable act of injustice. He woke before the first light touched the city skyline, the familiar hush of dawn wrapping around his small apartment. Each morning began the same way, a deep breath to center himself, a careful shuffle across the floor as his cane tapped out, a steady rhythm and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Though the world outside thrummed with color and movement, he had long learned to translate life through sound, touch, and intuition. Every chair, table, and counter had its place in his memory. Each step measured with precision born of years, of practice. His apartment was modest, neat, and deliberately organized. Books lined the shelves by category: history, philosophy, finance, their spines smooth from repeated hands tracing titles. On the kitchen counter sat a small digital calendar, which spoke the day, date, and upcoming appointments aloud when he pressed the button. Technology, he had discovered, was less a convenience than a tool for independence. While some pitied him for his blindness, he had cultivated skills that allowed him to navigate life with confidence, and he prided himself on mastering tasks that many would assume impossible. Outside, the neighborhood awakened with its usual symphony. Children laughed on their way to school, their voices ricocheting off the buildings. Street vendors called out the day's offerings: warm bread, fresh fruit, the hum of business in motion. A dog barked in the distance, followed by the clatter of an early commuter bike. Familiar footsteps passed by, some neighbors greeting each other, others walking in silence. To him, every sound was a landmark, every echo a map guiding his way. He could tell who approached by the rhythm of their steps, their weight, and their pace. Life for him had always been a mosaic of senses beyond sight. By the time he reached the coffee machine, the city had grown slightly louder. He had learned to navigate the world without letting it overwhelm him, each interaction deliberate, each movement purposeful. His routine was a form of meditation, a daily assertion that he could thrive despite the limitations others imagined. On that morning, he planned a simple errand, a trip to the local grocery store to pick up supplies for the week. He knew the layout, knew the aisles, the shelves, and the locations of everything he needed. This was supposed to be ordinary, routine, unremarkable. Yet, even as he set out with his cane tapping the familiar rhythm against the pavement, a subtle tension clung to the air. Perhaps it was the faint echo of a passerby's wary glance, or the hushed murmur of someone he passed on the street. He could not place it, yet the feeling lingered like the foreboding hum before a storm. As he entered the store, the usual noises greeted him: the chime of the automatic door, the soft shuffle of feet, the rustle of shopping carts. But something was different. The air carried a sharpness he had not felt before, a stiffness that made his stomach tighten. The cashier's eyes flicked up, hesitated, and quickly averted themselves. The line moved more slowly than usual, despite the empty aisles. Whispers, almost imperceptible, brushed against the edges of his awareness. He approached the counter, placing the items carefully in front of him. Every sound, every movement, every voice became a marker of tension rising. He had encountered subtle prejudices before, hesitant service, patronizing tones, but the unease today was heavier, more deliberate. A polite, strained smile from the clerk masked something darker beneath the surface. And then came the words that cut sharper than any blade. I'm sorry, but we can't serve you right now." His mind raced, recalling other times he had been judged, underestimated, or dismissed. The subtle microaggressions, the half-formed apologies, the sighs of exasperation. They were all echoes of this moment, now amplified and undeniable. Yet beneath the shock and anger, there was a quiet, simmering resolve. He would not let this pass unchallenged. Even as he processed the immediate humiliation, he began to calculate the path forward. Every word, every gesture, every sound in the room would become part of a narrative, one he could control, one that could expose the prejudice that had surfaced so brazenly. For years he had navigated the world with skill and patience. Now it would be tested in ways he had never anticipated. The store, the staff, the onlookers, none of them would leave unchanged. This ordinary morning had become a crucible, one in which the small, simmering injustices of everyday life would collide with the quiet, unyielding strength of a man who had long learned that blindness did not limit his vision of justice. And beneath it all, a single question hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of coffee or the rustle of paper. How long would society continue to dismiss the humanity of those it deemed different, and who would finally rise to demand that the truth be seen, acknowledged, and reckoned with? The moment he heard the words, "We can't serve you right now," his mind raced. Shock collided with disbelief, then simmered into a quiet, simmering fury. He had encountered prejudice before, subtle microaggressions and dismissive glances, but never like this. Not so blatant, not so public. The weight of the room pressed down on him, the silence of bystanders amplifying the humiliation. He felt every heartbeat, every shuffle, every whispered exchange around him, and knew the world was testing him in ways he had long anticipated, yet dreaded. The clerk avoided his gaze, fidgeting with a pen, muttering something about policies he couldn't understand without looking. Other customers glanced at him, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, most unsure where to place themselves in this tension-filled room. He realized, as he had countless times before, that prejudice often didn't announce itself. It crept into corners, hid behind polite words and hollow apologies, and struck hardest when least expected. He remained calm, but internally the gears were turning. Each step, each word he considered became a measure of precision. How could he expose the injustice without escalating danger? How could he confront the audacity of blatant discrimination without giving the staff an excuse to dismiss him entirely? These thoughts raced as the minutes dragged by, the clerk glancing nervously toward the manager, who had not yet appeared. And then it began to escalate. A customer, younger, perhaps emboldened by ignorance, whispered aloud, "Why's he even here? Can't he just go somewhere else?" The words struck like an unexpected slap, sharp and biting. A few heads nodded subtly, and the atmosphere thickened with judgment. The room had become a courtroom, with the man cast as a defendant for simply existing in that space. He felt the familiar sting of isolation, the way society could turn even a routine outing into a trial of dignity. Yet he also felt the rising strength of his resolve. He would not be invisible. He would not allow humiliation to define him. The subtle injustice of daily life had built toward this, a crescendo that demanded response. He quietly signaled to the clerk, asking for the manager, who now appeared, flustered, trying to smooth over the situation with practiced corporate words. "We have policies," the manager began, voice measured but cold. "It's not personal." Not personal. Those words cut more deeply than any insult. He had heard them countless times before, a thin veneer over systemic prejudice, an excuse that allowed discrimination to hide behind bureaucracy. But today would not be brushed aside. His voice, calm but firm, carried over the hum of the store. "You may believe it's not personal," he said, "but denying someone service based on who they are is personal, every single time." The room was silent, the hum of the fluorescent lights above somehow louder than the whispers and shuffling feet that had filled the store moments before. Every gaze, from customers to staff, was fixed on him, the man who had been denied service, the man who refused to be silenced. The weight of expectation pressed down, thick and heavy, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady, deliberate, like the measured taps of his cane against the floor that had guided him through countless streets, aisles, and offices. Today, that rhythm carried something more purpose. The manager, still, flustered, attempted to regain control. "Sir, please, No!" he interrupted, voice calm but ringing with authority. "You will not dismiss this. You have made your choice. You denied me service. You humiliated me. And now the world is watching." A murmur rippled through the store. Some customers gasped. Some leaned closer, and others simply froze, unsure how to respond. The clerk behind. The counter shifted nervously, the pen clattering to the floor, an involuntary tremor betraying fear. The weight of exposure was undeniable. Every act of prejudice had been magnified by the witnesses present, every hidden assumption laid bare, for all to see. He raised a hand slightly, signaling for silence. The room obeyed instinctively, caught between curiosity and tension. "You think this is just about policy?" he continued, voice unwavering. "But policies are written, enforced, and ignored by people. When people use rules to target others, to humiliate, to diminish, to assert control, that is not policy. That is prejudice, and that is not acceptable." The manager opened their mouth, but no words came. The moment had arrived. The simmering tension that had built over minutes, hours, and even years of subtle microaggressions now coalesced into something undeniable, a public confrontation of injustice. He could feel it, sense it, even in the hushed breaths of the bystanders. The world was paying attention, and for the first time in this moment of discrimination, the balance of power shifted. A customer, emboldened, spoke aloud. "But it's just a store. Are you making a big deal?" He turned toward them, cane tapping with a deliberate rhythm, eyes fixed firmly on the crowd despite their own unease. "It is never just a store," he said. "It is a reflection of society. Every act of bias, no matter how small, reinforces the notion that some people are less than others. Today, it is me. Tomorrow, it could be anyone you know. And that, sir, is why it matters." Gasps spread, whispers turned to murmurs of acknowledgement. Some avoided his gaze, discomfort radiating from them in waves. The manager's hands clenched at their sides, helpless to regain authority. Every witness had become a participant, every silent observer a judge. The clerk finally spoke, their voice shaky. I didn't mean—" He raised a finger to pause them. "Intent does not erase impact. Denying service, humiliating, someone in public, ignoring humanity, that cannot be undone by apologies whispered behind closed doors. Today, the impact is public, visible, undeniable." The tension reached its peak. A few employees stepped back, unsure of whether to intervene or remain passive. Some customers began filming discreetly on their phones, their devices capturing the moment that would soon ripple far beyond these walls. The air was electric. heavy with anticipation and suppressed outrage, and then a decisive act. He stepped forward, removing the basket from the counter with deliberate care. "I will not leave," he said firmly. "Not until this injustice is acknowledged, not until accountability is taken. You denied me service. You attempted to hide behind policy. Now you will confront the consequences of your actions." Silence fell, punctuated only by the faint hum of lights and the soft tap of his cane. The manager attempted to speak again, this time with louder insistence. "Sir, please, this isn't necessary." He shook his head. "It is necessary. Because for every person who is told they are less than, who is made to feel invisible, who is humiliated for their identity, there must be a stand. Today, this stand is mine, and it is witnessed." A ripple of movement coursed through the room. Some customers whispered words of support, others glanced uneasily toward the door, as if the confrontation might escalate. The clerk's hands trembled, their face pale. For the first time, the power of systemic bias, usually quiet, hidden, convenient, was exposed fully in a public arena. He began to recount in calm but deliberate detail the sequence of events, the denial, the whispered comments, the hesitation, the assumption. Each word landed like a hammer strike, shaping the narrative of injustice. The witnesses could feel it, the deliberate cruelty that had been masked by smiles, small talk, and procedural excuses. The discrimination could no longer hide in the shadows. Then he acted decisively. Slowly he began to gather his items, preparing to leave, but not quietly. Every step, every tap of his cane resonated like a statement. Dignity maintained, courage displayed, power reclaimed. The manager opened their mouth one final time, as if to argue, to deflect, to assert control. But he stopped, holding up a hand. "Do not speak. Let the moment speak for itself. Let every person here remember what was attempted and what was denied, and what must never happen again." The room was still, the air thick with disbelief and awe. A customer whispered to another, "I can't believe this is happening." Another raised a phone to record the encounter, knowing it would spread far beyond this single store. The clerk, pale and shaking, avoided his gaze entirely, while the manager faltered, unable to regain authority. And in that silence, a quiet, but undeniable truth emerged. This confrontation, this act of courage, was not just about service at a store. It was about every person who was denied, dismissed, or humiliated because of their identity, ability, or circumstance. Every act of prejudice that had been normalized, ignored, or hidden was now exposed in living color. The automatic doors closed behind him, leaving the store behind, but the echoes of what had just transpired lingered like a low hum in the city air. For the man who had been humiliated, every step away from that fluorescent-lit arena was both relief and reflection. Relief that the confrontation had been witnessed, recorded, and could no longer be denied. Reflection on the weight of every subtle injustice he had endured over the years, and the realization that moments of courage could reshape the narrative for not just himself, but countless others. The world outside moved at its usual pace, cars honking, pedestrians navigating the streets, life continuing. Yet for him, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every sound, every familiar rhythm was now imbued with the memory of resistance, of dignity asserted in the face of blatant prejudice. He understood the paradox of this moment. While the store behind him had attempted to diminish him, the very act of standing firm had magnified his presence, his humanity, and the truth of injustice in ways far beyond the physical space he had just occupied. News travels fast in moments like these. Within hours, snippets of the encounter had begun circulating. A short video captured by a customer, whispers shared online, social media accounts framing the story as both shocking and instructive. The public's response was immediate: outrage, empathy, debate, and a flood of voices insisting that the act of denial could not go unaddressed. The story became a mirror reflecting society's ongoing struggles with systemic bias, ableism, and the subtle prejudices often dismissed in everyday life. Meanwhile, the store itself was in turmoil. Management scrambled to respond, issuing statements about policy, training, and inclusion. Staff members were reassigned or disciplined. Meetings were called to address the glaring gap between corporate ideals and actual practice. And while these actions were procedural, they were also undeniably consequential. The first signs that accountability had arrived where previously it had been ignored or deferred. Every action taken was now amplified by the knowledge that the world was watching, that silence could no longer shield those who perpetrated injustice. For him, the impact was both personal and communal. The humiliation of the initial denial was a memory that could never be erased, yet the power of standing firm transformed it into a tool, a demonstration of resilience, dignity, and courage. He had faced the full force of systemic prejudice in a public arena and emerged not diminished, but fortified. Each step he took from that store became symbolic, a silent testament to the refusal to be rendered invisible by bias or ignorance. Friends and family, who had followed the unfolding events with anxiety and anticipation, offered support and validation. Messages of admiration and solidarity poured in, reminding him that courage, even in its quietest form, inspires others to act. And for those who had previously doubted whether the world could see or acknowledge acts of discrimination, this confrontation became evidence that persistence, clarity, and unwavering integrity could affect change. Yet the story did not end at the doors of the store. The narrative spread, picked up by local journalists, advocacy groups, and social justice organizations. Discussions ensued about the responsibilities of businesses, employees, and communities to ensure equitable treatment for all, regardless of ability, race, or identity. The incident became a catalyst for dialogue. Workshops, training sessions, and awareness campaigns were initiated, emphasizing the human cost of unchecked prejudice. The personal struggle of one individual evolved into a societal lesson, echoing far beyond a single store or a single day. And as he walked away, cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement, the city continuing around him in indifferent motion, he carried with him a sense of quiet triumph. He had faced discrimination directly, exposed its cruelty publicly, and inspired change both immediate and far-reaching. Courage is contagious, accountability unavoidable, and standing up for dignity, even alone, reverberates far beyond the individual.